4 days ago, a 6-minute clip dropped on X. Nobody on mainstream financial media touched it. No Bloomberg segment, no CNBC Chiron, just a quiet sit-down interview between Ripple's managing director and a fintech publication. And buried inside it was a single sentence that reframes everything. Banks aren't thinking about pilots anymore. They're thinking about production. That wasn't a crypto influencer talking. That wasn't a tweet. That was the managing director of one of the most licensed financial technology companies on the planet, describing a shift that has already happened inside the boardrooms of the world's largest financial institutions. And while retail investors spent this week watching whether $1.30 holds as resistance, the people who actually move global capital were at a completely different altitude, asking a completely different question. Today, we break all of it down: the infrastructure, the math, the moves that are already in motion. Stay close. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. No price predictions, no guarantees, just the information that helps you understand what's actually being constructed here and why it matters for the asset sitting at the center of it. Today, we go through the Ripple infrastructure blueprint that just became public, the numbers on the XRP ledger that most people are not reading correctly, and one institutional move that flew under almost everyone's radar. Let's go. Here is the question nobody seems to be asking. When a $1 trillion fund wants to convert a position, say tokenized US Treasury bills into euro-denominated stablecoins, and they want it done in seconds, not days, what actually sits in the middle of that trade? What makes the conversion happen instantly without them needing to find a specific buyer on the other side? Right now, the legacy answer is correspondent banking, Nostro and Vostro accounts, a settlement window that can stretch 2 to 3 business days. And there is roughly $27 trillion sitting idle in those accounts at any given moment, not working, not earning, just waiting to settle. That's the friction that the entire global banking system is built on top of, and it's the friction that Ripple has spent 12 years architecting a solution for. Here's what most XRP holders still don't fully understand, and I think this is genuinely the most important concept in this whole conversation. The trader never sees XRP. Think about what that means. A bank initiates a transaction. They see the treasury bill go in. They see the euro stablecoin come out. What happens in the middle, the bridge, the conversion, the atomic settlement in 3 to 5 seconds, is invisible to them. That's XRP. XRP is the swap kid, the asset doing the invisible work at the center of every trade. Adelia Torman, head of digital assets at the XRP Commons, said it plainly at Paris Blockchain Week just weeks ago. Institutional DeFi is no longer a narrative on the XRP ledger. It is happening now. And she's right. But what she's describing, this world of yield-bearing tokenized instruments and on-chain privacy features for institutional use, none of it works without that invisible bridge layer functioning reliably at scale. And now ask yourself the question that the math forces you to ask. If the asset in the middle of every trade is XRP, and the transaction values being moved are in the billions, not millions, what does the price of that bridge asset need to be to process those flows without catastrophic slippage? This is not a prediction. This is a mechanical requirement built into the design of the system. Every acquisition Ripple has made over the last 18 months makes sense through that lens. G Treasury, Rail, Palisade, Ripple Prime, they are not acquiring companies for press releases. They are assembling the full infrastructure stack: custody, payments, treasury management, prime brokerage, stablecoin issuance, so that when a major financial institution decides it is ready to move at production scale, Ripple is the one-stop shop that handles every single layer. That's the architecture, and it just got confirmed publicly by the person running it. Let's talk numbers, because this is where the abstract becomes real. RLUSD on the XRP ledger. As of June 10th, 2026, and these are on-chain numbers, not projections, RLUSD has grown from $235 million at the start of this year to $762 million. That's 224% growth in roughly 6 months, not on Ethereum, not on Solana, on the XRP ledger. And here's why that number matters beyond the headline. In institutional DeFi, stablecoins are not just payment rails, they are the monetary base. They are the collateral layer that makes more complex financial products possible. RLUSD is being positioned exactly there as the foundation that the yield bearing instruments, the lending products, the structured finance vehicles get built on top of. A stablecoin at $762 million dollars and growing 224% year to date is not a minor data point. That's a system taking root. Now look at real world assets, tokenized assets on chain. The XRP ledger currently sits at $1.9 billion dollars in tokenized real world assets. Ethereum is at $1.6 billion, dollars, Stellar at $1.4 billion. dollars. The XRP ledger, the one people spent years calling dead and banker controlled and irrelevant to real DeFi, is now the number one blockchain on Earth for real world asset tokenization. That just happened. Here's the macro math I want you to understand, and then I'll connect it to the supply picture. Cross-border payments are approximately $150 trillion dollars annually. Foreign exchange clears $7.5 trillion dollars every single day. The derivatives market, and this number genuinely shocks people every time they hear it, carries an estimated $1.2 quadrillion dollars in notional value. XRP does not need to capture all of that. It does not need to capture a tenth of it. It needs to be the invisible bridge layer for a fraction of that global flow to generate enormous demand pressure on a fixed supply of 100 billion tokens, most of which are already out of liquid circulation. And then there is this. The XRP ETF tracker just crossed 926 million XRP locked up in regulated investment products. We are approaching a billion XRP sitting in exchange-traded vehicles, off the liquid market, not available for purchase, gone from exchange circulation. That is not retail FOMO. That is structured, regulated capital-absorbing supply. T. Rowe Price, managing $1.9 trillion in assets, just received approval for their TKNZ active crypto ETF XRP is on the eligible asset list. That sentence deserves a moment of silence. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through in the next 3 minutes is the part that most analysts, including a lot of XRP bulls, are completely missing, and it changes the entire argument about where this price goes. Let's go back to June 11th. Casey Croddick, Ripple's managing director, in a sit-down with FinTech Futures. Here's the actual quote, because the language matters. Over the last 18 months, things have gone from pilots. Banks aren't thinking about pilots anymore. They're thinking about real-world production use cases and solving for utility. We want to own that full infrastructure piece across custody, stablecoin, payments, prime brokerage, treasury management. That is not a pitch. That is a product roadmap that is already in execution. And when you look at what Ripple has actually assembled over those same 18 months, you start to understand why she can say that with that level of calm certainty. G Treasury, acquired for $1 billion. This gives Ripple direct access to enterprise treasury management at the corporate scale. Companies like American Airlines, with bank accounts and cash operations across dozens of countries, needing to move funds through international corridors instantly. G Treasury is the product. XRP is the rail. Rail, acquired for roughly $200 million, Rail currently represents approximately 10% of global business-to-business stablecoin payments. Reread that. One platform, 10% of B2B stablecoin volume on the planet, and Ripple acquired it for $200 million. That number is going to look unbelievable in 3 years. Palisade, and this one is constantly overlooked, high-speed digital asset custody using multi-party computation and zero-trust architecture. The specific capability that matters here, transaction signing in milliseconds for high-frequency institutional use cases. When an institutional desk is running automated operations across tokenized assets, they need to sign and settle in milliseconds, not seconds. Palisade solves that. Ripple Prime, formerly Hidden Road, now showing 3 times growth since Ripple acquired it. Institutional-grade prime brokerage, clearing, and financing for assets including XRP and RLUSD. This is the piece that lets institutional desks actually trade and finance positions using XRP as a core asset, not just custody it, use it. Now, here is the question I want you to sit with. Does a firm that has spent 89 years carefully managing the retirement savings of ordinary Americans, a firm with T. Rowe Price's compliance culture, legal exposure, and fiduciary obligations, add a volatile digital asset to an active ETF without exhaustive due diligence? No, they do not gamble with a reputation like that. They position, and they just positioned toward XRP. Where does this go from here? And I want to be specific because vague timelines are not useful to anybody. The US Clarity Act is not perfect regulation. Anyone who tells you it's perfect is either not reading it or selling something. But here's what Casey Croddick herself said in that same interview. The biggest barrier to truly global adoption of this infrastructure is not the technology. It is regulatory fragmentation. The EU has MiCA fully operational. Japan's FSA is moving. The US is still assembling its framework. And until those major jurisdictions align, the institutions that have completed their due diligence are going to operate cautiously at the perimeter, testing, validating, not fully committing at production scale. That is not a bearish signal. That is the setup for what comes next. When regulatory clarity lands in the US and the G20 economies start harmonizing their digital asset frameworks, and that process is visibly underway, the capital sitting on the sidelines does not trickle in. It does not gradually increase its allocation. Capital moves in blocks. The wait and see money becomes positioned money fast, and we already have early signals of what that looks like. Paris Blockchain Week, just a few weeks ago. Adelia Torman's team was there, and she described something specific. The conversations at that conference were already converting into actual projects being built on the XRP ledger weeks later. Players from the US, Asia, Europe, the Middle East coming out of the woodwork now that the Ripple SEC lawsuit is resolved and the regulatory air is clearing. The Reserve Bank of Australia ran a proof of concept with JP Morgan on the XRP ledger. Central banks do not run proof of concepts for academic interest. They run them when they are seriously evaluating infrastructure for real deployment. The infrastructure is built, the institutions are testing, the regulatory path is forming. The only variable is timing, and timing is the one thing nobody gets to control. I know it is hard to look at $1.30 and feel urgency. I know the red candles over the past few months have been exhausting, and I am not here to tell you what price is coming or when. What I am here to do is separate the noise from the structure. The structure says this: XRP has a fixed supply. 100 billion total, always. No inflation mechanism, no additional issuance. Current circulating supply is somewhere in the 55 to 57 billion range. Exchange reserves have been declining. The ETF tracker just crossed 926 million XRP, locked into regulated investment products. And Ripple Prime is now providing financing against XRP positions for institutional desks, which means even held XRP is being deployed as productive capital rather than sitting idle on exchanges. Now think about what happens when RLUSD scales from $762 million to $5 billion. When the yield-bearing tokenized instruments Adelia Torman describes start absorbing XRP as a bridge asset in every transaction. When the institutional DeFi products being built on the XRP ledger right now go live and start processing real volume, where does that supply come from? Being early feels exactly like being wrong. I've said that before, and it keeps being true. The people who understood the G Treasury acquisition when it happened looked like they were overthinking it. The people who understood what Rail represented when Ripple bought it for $200 million looked like they were reading too much into it. The timeline is frustrating. The price action is frustrating, but the architecture underneath the price is the clearest it has ever been. Cassie Trades made a point worth repeating. Nothing confirms a new uptrend until $1.65 is reclaimed and flipped to support. Until then, you watch the structure, not the candle. You don't chase. You hold your analysis and you let the market show you what it's doing. The structure says the supply is tightening, the institutions are positioning, and the infrastructure is now complete enough to deliver on the thesis that has been in front of us for years. T. Rowe Price, $1.9 trillion in assets under management. 89 years of fiduciary conservatism. They can now put XRP into your grandfather's retirement portfolio. Let that be the thing you walk away from this video holding on to. This is what institutional adoption actually looks like. Not a tweet, not a conference panel. A 120-year-old financial institution clearing every legal compliance and risk management gate it has and deciding XRP belongs in an active ETF. The XRP ledger is now the #1 blockchain for real-world asset tokenization on Earth. RLUSD is up 224% year to date. Ripple has assembled the full infrastructure stack. Banks have moved from pilots to production. The institutions are not asking whether this works anymore. They're asking how fast they can scale it. The people watching this video who understand what is being built are not staring at daily candles asking whether $1.30 holds. They're thinking about what this system looks like when it is processing a meaningful fraction of $150 trillion in annual cross-border flow, and what that does to demand for the asset sitting invisible at the center of every trade. That's the question that matters, and the fact that you're asking it puts you ahead of most people in this market. The institutions are not coming, they're already here. The only question left is whether you'll still be holding when the rest of the market figures that out. I am Dr. Evelyn Carter. Stay patient, stay rational. Drop a comment below. Where do you think XRP is headed from here? I read everyone. See you in the next one.